Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Healthcare's Missing Link, the podcast where we help you uncover the things that are taking away your best health. And today, as you know, I'm Dr. Mark Sherwood. It's a special day because I get to introduce you to really my friends, my peers, my colleagues, and people that have influenced my life. And it's my great pleasure to introduce on the podcast today Umahro Cadogan from Denmark. He is an expert functional medicine practitioner. He has his own practice in Denmark. And actually, he was one of the primary instructors that impacted Dr. Michelle and I in our introduction into nutrigenomics, nutrigenetics, and epigenetics, et cetera. So he's been a huge impact on our life. Umahro, thanks for joining us today. We're so grateful, man.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to dive in. This first, we're going to do two series of podcasts, and I want people to really get the best of Umahro, so to speak. And so, you have dealt with the subject of type 2 diabetes, and we talked about this. I want you to go in from the top to the bottom, and tell our listeners basically what is type 2 diabetes, what's the pathology, and what should we be doing?
Yeah. Well, so type 2 diabetes, the best way to describe it is that you're kind of like blood sugar, carbohydrate insensitive, not from a digestive point of view, but from the point of view that you're unable to metabolize the amount of carbohydrates you're eating, and therefore you get all these metabolic derangements. Your blood sugars will go high, but there are all sorts of other things that will go wrong as well, because your body's going to throw fits. It's like if you have a car that runs off gas and if you live with diesel or the other way around, then the engine will break down sooner or later. So in type 2 diabetes, essentially, you're at a point because of a combination of genetics, lifestyle, environmental factors, and so forth, where you're unable to handle carbohydrates properly. And then if you eat carbohydrates in major amounts, as many people do nowadays, you will get all sorts of biochemical hiccups and issues with high blood sugars, but also it will change your lipids, so your ability to control cholesterol levels and cholesterol types and how those cholesterol particles have an impact on your cardiovascular system. That gets thrown off. You can get inflammatory issues. You can get appetite regulation issues. You can get cognitive neurological issues in the short and the long term. All sorts of hormonal systems can be thrown out of whack. And obviously, one of the central things here is that you get insulin resistance. So usually, as blood sugar levels go up, we'll secrete insulin from the beta cells in the pancreas. And insulin's main role is to make sure that we move glucose, or blood sugar, from the bloodstream into metabolically active tissues to use it. And normally then what happens is, if more carbohydrates are ingested and your blood sugars go higher, then you produce more insulin, and the insulin literally opens like a little door in your cells to let in glucose. So it's called the glucose 4 transporter. And usually it's sitting dormant inside the cell. So imagine you have a cell and you have a door or a gateway built, but it's not on the surface. It's actually sitting inside the cell, and then blood sugars go up and insulin comes along, hits a receptor, so like a molecular ear on the surface of the cell, and that tells the cell, I'm going to take this glucose 4 transporter, move it to the surface of the cell and open up the gate, or open up the floodgates and literally suck in glucose into a muscle cell or other tissue, and then we'll burn that glucose for energy. But then in type 2 diabetes, even as you secrete more insulin, it's not able to do its job. So even as you start producing massive amounts of insulin, blood sugar levels stay high; they'll stay elevated. And a lot of the direct pathology, or the disease process, it's not the high blood sugar, but it's what happens when blood sugar is high. Because think about it: if you have glucose, which is kind of sugar floating in your bloodstream, which is liquid, what happens as you increase the amount of sugar circulating in your bloodstream? Well, sugar dissolved in water is kind of a sticky substance. So literally you will start having glucose molecules sticking to the walls of your arteries and your cardiovascular system, and all sorts of things inside your red blood cells, and albumin, proteins, messenger molecules. And after that glucose sticks, it literally oxidizes, so it burns. So, the chemical term is glycylation or glycation, or if you talk about it from a chemistry point of view, you call it like a Maillard reaction, but basically it's caramelization. So the same thing happens as if you were to throw sugar into a pot, turn up the heat, and wait for it to melt and turn into caramel. And obviously, once you start getting caramelized, your bloodstream and other tissues, that causes problems. First of all, you get dysfunctional. Imagine if someone were to dip you in caramel, and as it starts, cooling down, it's sticky, so you touch anything and you're stuck to it. And as it cools down, it stiffens up, so you can't move properly. And on top of that, once you get cells and tissues and components in your body that are caramelized, they actually promote inflammation. So, I mean, these end products from this process are called advanced glycosylation end products. And, the funny abbreviation, because the abbreviation is AGE, aging, which is literally what happens molecular. You get a lot older, a whole lot faster. And then your white blood cells that are literally like the troops in your army, they have receptors for these, caramelization products. So if you do the abbreviation receptor for an advanced glycosylation end product, RAGE, RAGE, and so they get initiated, they get riled up, right? And so it's like, okay, if you have soldiers or, warriors, and they get riled up and they're ready to go, it's like they're going to start shooting and they're going to start solving things with weapons and destructive means. So initially they'll try to gobble up the tissue or all this molecular caramel, but in the process, then they go from from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5. So they're going to be like, we're easy now. Like actually, we're in a sort of war mode, war situation, and that happens not just locally but systemically. So with time, your whole body is going to go into a kind of state of high alert or emergency situation. And when you have a country that goes into a state of lockdown or an emergency situation, then things just break down. And so that's at that point, you get all this pathology, especially cardiovascular pathology. So your cardiovascular systems, you have a much higher risk for rate of atherosclerosis, blood clots, and so forth. But obviously other tissues will be impacted as well. And then if you can't move glucose into cells where you're supposed to burn it and metabolize it, that means that although there's like a massive excess of energy floating around in your system, at the same time, you might actually be sort of starving at the molecular level, right? So you might have a lot of potential energy floating around, but very little energy output. So it's this strange situation of surplus and starvation or famine at the same time, and then things getting caramelized, and then the police force and the army, they get riled up, not in a good way. I mean, an army is lovely, the police force is lovely. When they take out bad guys and criminals, they should be there and they should be on alert, high alert, and highly reactive. But if they start going after the general population, where they can't distinguish between population and foe, or then you get this self-sustaining downward spiral where things go wrong. So to put it in graphical terms, that's really what happens, and obviously that's not a good thing. And then you get all these knock-on derangements because insulin levels go really high. And so your body it's insulin, it has other roles than just driving glucose into cells. It's a growth factor, which is good to some extent, but at some point that might start causing problems. So there seems to be a link between type 2 diabetes and increased cancer risk. And one explanation might be the caramelization and you get cellular damage and inflammation. But another explanation for that correlation or relationship might be, well, if insulin levels go really high, you start driving growth of all sorts of cells. And yeah, sure, you want insulin if you want your bicep to grow. That's also why sometimes people will abuse insulin in bodybuilding and so forth, along with anabolic steroids to get an advantage and more muscle or tissue growth than you can get naturally. But then if you have cancer cells or precancer cells and you get more of a growth signal, right, they grow faster, they grow more aggressively. So you get that issue. And then insulin also, when levels go really high, that can start impacting sex, hormone synthesis. So you get women are more likely to get PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, and other hormonal problems for men also. Insulin can drive, the conversion of testosterone to estrogen for men. So they get low testosterone, high estrogen. So it's like your guns will be converted into boobs, not pecs, but boobs. And whereas boobs might be very lovely if you fancy them on a woman, I think like boobs that are not pecs on a man, you need very special taste, or you have very special requirements if you find that lovely and delicious rather than a bit maybe not so good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so you get that issue. and in women, actually, they can get high androgens. So although in men, elevated insulin and blood sugar overload and calorie overload generally will drive you from your testosterone being converted into estrogen. In women, they can get high androgens. So they, like all the hair up here will disappear, but it will reappear right here. So you'll get a beard, and then you'll get a chest beard and a back beard, and you'll get all sorts of problems with, acne, skincare issues, and so forth. So that's not, that's rather problematic. And that's also why. And then there's a link with obesity, and it's like what and excess body fat and body fat stored in the wrong places, and it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Sometimes one thing comes before the other, but one of the things you'll get if you store too much fat in adipose tissue is that on its own can promote inflammation, right? Yeah. So especially if you get central adiposity and visceral fat, so all the fat that sits right around your midsection, especially if it's not just subcutaneous, but if it's actually inside your abdomen, or in the worst case scenario, in your liver or in your pancreas, that drives inflammation. And one of the consequences of inflammation, whether that's from obesity or chronic infections or just unhealthy lifestyle, is that during inflammation, you actually get mild insulin resistance and derangement in energy metabolism in general. So you get that, that going. And then also, if you start storing too much fat in your liver, which can happen just from physical inactivity, from eating too much and eating too much of the wrong things, that also gets you in trouble, because your liver is supposed to be a glucose buffer. So under normal circumstances, your liver can hold on to a couple of 100 grams of carbohydrates if you get more than you need, and then just release them over time, over the next hours or the next day or so. But if your liver is already stuffed to the point of bursting with energy and being forced to store fat, and the glycogen that your liver can take a couple of 100 grams of carbohydrates, turn them into glycogen in storage. But if it's already full of glycogen and fat, and then you add more carbohydrates to the mix, and blood sugar levels already too high, or they're where they should be, your liver's like, yeah, usually I give you I give you this extra storage place to make sure blood sugar levels are steady as they should be. Unfortunately, I've been baconized. I'm about to explode, or I've become like the human foie gras. So whatever energy comes along, I'm just going to pass it on. I'm not going to help you regulate it. And then I hope someone can take that glucose out of the bloodstream before you end up with damage. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that definitely has an impact on how severe type 2 diabetes is, or the risk, is visceral adiposity. So when you have a lot of fat there, and that's also, if you can, one of the things that will usually help improve blood sugar regulation really fast is if you can get rid of fat stored in the liver. And then that whilst there are often a link between type 2 diabetes and dyslipidemia with high triglycerides, high LDL cholesterol levels and VLDL levels, well, because if your liver's in a situation where it's already full of fat and energy, right, your liver also, usually it helps regulate the levels of cholesterol particles. So it secretes but also reabsorbs LDL particles and secretes VLDL particles, and also secretes HDL particles and reabsorbs them. But again, if it's already full to the point of bursting, it's like, there are excess LDL particles and VLDL particles circulating. I can't take any of those right now because I'm about to explode with fat and excess energy. So hopefully someone out there can deal with those particles. And then add to that, so you already have arteries where the surface is being damaged by caramelization. There's inflammation going on. Your immune system's more aggressive. It's riled up. It's ready to rumble, tangle, go to war. And then you have elevated levels of cholesterol particles because your liver says, well, the glucose there can't do anything about that and hold on to it in the first place. And those cholesterol particles, I can't take any of those back. And actually, because I'm full to the point of bursting, I'm going to secrete some extra cholesterol particles to get rid of some of the fat I'm storing, hoping that it will either be burned by some muscles or go into some of the adipose tissue under skin, which is a better storage space. So that's going on. And that's why obviously there's this really clear link or correlation between modern industrialized societies where people eat too much and move too little and have easy access to calorie not just all day long, but 24/7, and increasing obesity and type 2 diabetes. There's certain genetics also play a role, because you can get people who do all the wrong things in a modern society. They're overweight, they don't move, they have central adiposity, they might also have dyslipidemia, but might never quite progress to the point of type 2 diabetes. So genetics are certainly involved. But a part of the background is this modern society with an excess of calories from the wrong sources, not enough good things in food, too little movement. And also, you can see stress and sleep has an impact. So if you're sleep deprived, if you're stressed, that also interferes with your ability to handle fuel, including glucose. So throw that together and then add some common nutrient deficiencies, or at least insufficiencies. We know some of the nutrients that have quite an impact on blood sugar regulation. Vitamin D is important. Not to say if you have rampant type 2 diabetes, just dose vitamin D really high and it will go away. But if your vitamin D is less than optimal, then your blood sugar regulation will be poorer than it should be. We know magnesium is important. So if you have a suboptimal magnesium status, your ability to handle blood sugar and regulate levels is impacted. Zinc as well has an impact. Chromium has an impact. Some of the B vitamins also now are appearing to have an impact. And even things like your gut microbiota, so all the 1.5-2 kilograms of critters living down there, not only have quite an impact on how, what your digestive system feels like, whether that's nice and easy or bubbly in a not very pleasant manner, but they also have a knock-on effect on things like blood sugar regulation. And we can also see probably also a link with environmental pollution. So some of the things we're exposed to. I mean, if you have someone who's massively overweight and isn't moving, isn't sleeping, and is really unhealthy, don't blame their type 2 diabetes on environmental pollution, but add something that just interferes 5-10% with blood sugar regulation on top of all the primary problems, and things get, you get a rather explosive combo or cocktail. So you have that a modern society with an ancient genome.
Interesting.
Is a bad combination. It's like, someone loaded the gun, then they pulled the trigger, and that will cause damage. And not. Sometimes you pull the trigger and you shoot an evil person, but here it's like you point the gun at yourself and you shoot.
It's interesting. So you talk about all this cascade of, we like to use the term inflammaging. I mean, it's really I love the age and the rage sort of acronyms. But all this process seems to go back to this idea of consumption of too many carbohydrates. True?
Yeah. Well, too much. I mean, I think you can sort of prioritize it and say, first of all, an excess consumption of calories. So if you eat too many calories, that's more likely to lead to adiposity to a point where that in fact influences blood sugar regulation and fat storage in your liver, and in the worst case scenario in your pancreas, right? So first of all, there's too many calories. That's an issue. And also just think about it, if you can only utilize a certain amount of energy, even though you have a lot of storage space, you might not be able to shift that excess energy. So that's the first problem. Then on top of that, add that it's an excess consumption of carbohydrates, at least from the wrong sources, because you can see certain ancestral populations that have a diet that seems very carbohydrate rich. So some of these hunter-gatherers, they get maybe 70% of their calories from carbohydrates, but they move all the time. Yep. They practice intermittent fasting, not because they want to, because ever so often there's no food and they have to move a lot to get it. And if they want to get a large amount of carbohydrates, they'll also get more fiber than a panda eats in a day, right? So, so some of these ancestral populations or hunter-gatherer societies that are still around might consume 100, 200, 300 grams of fiber per day. Yep. Which means they probably also poop a lot and large poops. But then when we get to in modern foods, where we get a high concentration of carbohydrates from these really energy dense sources that aren't very fulfilling, that don't have much fiber, we have easy access, so they're absorbed quickly. They don't give you the same degree of satiety because all the fiber and all the other things that are there are gone. The micronutrients and the phytochemicals, these plant compounds that are usually there to help you warn your body what's going on and also help your body metabolize all that energy, they're gone. So you do that. And then also add on top of that people eat the wrong type of fats, because, we can see with fat, obviously fat's really energy dense. So in some ways that makes it easier to overeat if you eat a lot of especially refined fat, because it's not in a whole food. That gives you more satiety. But then also the type of fat. So when people then get a lot of these damaged, rancid, scorched fats that cause inflammation and rage but just intrinsically by their nature, because they're already damaged and burned, or if you get trans fats, especially, I mean, that's like throwing
trans fats, and like the burned oils and things like that.
Yeah, that causes problems. And then also, although saturated fat's been vilified to an extent that's not really, that it shouldn't be, there is a link. We can see that if you overconsume calories, and you either in studies, and you either give people a lot of saturated fat from refined foods and refined sources, or you give them a lot of mono and polyunsaturated fats, it's actually different where they store the excess energy. So there's also a tendency, a diet high in saturated fat with too little monounsaturated fat and omega-3s, that will guide you towards storing more fat viscerally and in your liver. So that combination, and then with too little movement, lack of sleep, which both impairs energy metabolism, but also really throws a spanner in your appetite regulation. I mean, there are studies where people were sleep deprived overeat anywhere from 300 to 800 calories per day without being aware of it, and they go for anything sweet, salty, and fatty. So that combination. So it's if you just say it's just carbohydrates, that's not quite correct. And there are these studies done where you can feed people and quite proportion of refined carbohydrates. But if they're actually not in energy excess and they're not overweight in the first place, it won't cause type 2 diabetes. So there are studies where people have been fed 20-25% of calories as refined sugar. Mm-hmm. And but again, this is in a short-term period, couple of weeks or months. And they actually, you couldn't see them developing type 2 diabetes. Not that I suggest that's a good idea to get, a quarter of your calories, but so it's also a matter of overconsumption. But then the carbohydrate sources that are predominant in a modern industrial, highly refined diet also predispose you to overeating, because they're not satiating. They're so concentrated. All the things in food that usually will cause some sort of auto-regulation of calories in and out are gone. So it becomes so easy to overconsume them. So when people say sugar is the cause of type 2 diabetes, say, well, imagine if you had 1 teaspoon of cane sugar on your oatmeal every morning, that wouldn't cause type 2 diabetes.
That's right.
The challenge is people aren't having 1 teaspoon, they're having not just tablespoon amounts, but they're having deciliters or cups of sugar when they add all sources together. So carbohydrates are part of the problem, but in general, it's an issue of over-refined foods and an excess of food availability, and people move too little, and they never have a break from eating or a break from energy going into their system. And then so all these things thrown together, that's like the perfect recipe, or I'm not sure perfect's the right word to use here, but it's a rather evil recipe for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic syndrome, where you get this combination of dyslipidemia, high blood pressure, vascular dysfunction in general, and high blood sugars, and everything that comes along with that. So
I think we understand that these are lifestyle diseases, no question about it.
They are, yeah.
The question that I know the answer, but I think a question people would have is, okay, here I am, Umahro. That's me. Can it be reversed?
It can. It can be, and then you can just discuss whether it's reversed or you can keep it under control. But you can certainly, with the right lifestyle intervention, have people who will have perfectly normal blood glucose levels, won't have dyslipidemia, won't have an elevated risk of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular complications, and can get off medications. But it does require, quite extensive lifestyle changes. But I mean, in some ways, it's easy. Type 2 diabetes was cured back in 1984. Mm-hmm. Karen O'Day, she's a really brilliant professor of population health at the Sydney and Adelaide University in Australia. She had a study with Aborigines who were living in urban Aboriginal people, or Australians living in urban areas of Aborigine descent, if you can say that. I hope that didn't offend anyone these days.
No, we all get that.
Correctness, yeah. And then she just brought them back into the outback. So she had them go in the outback and live with the Aborigines who still live old school. And so after 12 weeks, everything's regulated because they were exercised, not because they went to the gym, but like, yeah, sure, you're going anywhere, you're going to have to walk 15, 20 miles a day. And you'll get some sprints because there's a dangerous snake, so you have to get away, or you have to sprint to catch the kangaroo. Strength training, yeah, because if you sort of, went between sprinting and running and jogging and walking 15 miles that direction to catch the kangaroo, now you've killed it. Well, you have to pull it back. So like, you don't need to pull or push, weights or anything like that. Just grab onto the tail and pull that kangaroo, and it weighs, 100 pounds or a couple of 100 pounds, 15 miles back in the direction you came from. Then you have to dig a hole to get water and get timber and so forth. And ingesting an excess of calories is just impossible. Like, oh, you're hungry? Yeah, go catch another kangaroo. That's another 2,000 calories expended before you get your meal. So within 12 weeks, people, because they were forced to eat real foods, they ate a lot of plant food, not strictly vegetarian or vegan, but they ate lots of leaves, tubers, fruits when they were available, but that aren't as sweet as modern fruits. They were getting massive amounts of fiber. They were getting a diet with, it was impossible to eat any of these damaged fats because they're just not there. Yeah, they were getting animal fat, but the type of animal fat you find in animals out in nature is vastly different from what you find in modern industrial animals. And people were getting a proportionally relatively high protein diet, but from healthy sources. They were getting enough sleep because, like, oh yeah, you walk 15, 20 miles or more and worked your butt off, just physical labor to make sure you got food, shelter, water, fire. You will sleep, and and the sun goes down, and there's no light, there's no computer, anything. So I mean, the cure really is to have people revert to lots of movement. So usually, if you're going to say step by step, if you have type 2 diabetes, the first thing is to get in 1 hour of bipedal locomotion every day. So walk for an hour or more, cycle for an hour or more, get on the treadmill if you can't walk outside, get on a spinning cycle, anything like that. So your legs are moving and you're expending energy that way. And then once that's in place, add training a couple of times a week. And as you get in better shape, if you have time, you can recover, add more. And initially, probably the best types of training for type 2 diabetes will be strength training, because if you can add some lean mass, that your muscles are like also a sponge for glucose. So if you have higher lean mass, that gives you an extra storage space for calories in general, but especially for glucose. So that works. And then some high intensity training because we can see that as well metabolically. If people you can have people who exercise and they don't exercise that long, but they do these really grueling intervals. And even though it might not change their total body weight, it will get rid of some of the fat in their liver and pancreas, and it will give them better blood sugars without changing their diet. So get that in place. And then food-wise, start by eating lots of non-starchy vegetables and eat lean protein sources that contain healthy fats on their own. And then you're going to have to figure out where your limit is for carbohydrates. So I usually start people on a healthy paleo, like not a bacon paleo, but a real hunter-gatherer. So I say, okay, for every single meal, you're having at least 2 handfuls of non-starchy vegetables, 1 palmful to 1 handful of a healthy protein source, eggs, fish, other types of seafood, poultry, lean meat, game, that sort of thing. And then see where your blood sugar goes. And so, because one thing you can measure to track is your hemoglobin A1C, but that's literally how caramelized your red blood cells are, but that takes a while to change. You won't see any significant changes until at least in a month. Usually it takes 3 months, but I've seen people drop it within a month if they really go aggressively at lifestyle interventions. But what you can use as a really good guide is resting, like your fasting morning glucose. So I tell my clients to figure out how much do you need to reduce your carbohydrates until you get your fasting morning glucose into the normal range, not into an acceptable range for a diabetic, but into the normal range.
And what is that normal range? What would you call it? I guess
because the units are different. So in Europe, we use we will use millimoles per liter. So diabetic would be 7 millimoles per liter or higher of resting glucose, fasting glucose in the morning. Ideal is 5.6 or lower. So I just believe drop your carbohydrates until you get your fasting glucose under 5.6 millimoles per liter. Yep. So I have people who are heavily medicated who just by eating really non-starchy vegetables and lean protein sources, and then they walk and get their sleep in place. And within 2 weeks, we can normalize their blood glucose levels, and then we can start weaning them off medications little by little by little. And with time, they can get completely off insulin, off metformin, and off some of these GLP-1 analogs, and maintain normal blood sugars. And some of them with time can start increasing carbohydrates as well. But there are also some of my clients who, they have to stick to that sort of dietary template. So there's a TV show where I'm one of the co-hosts and creators here in Denmark that literally can food be medicine. And so we've had two seasons so far. And in season 1, we had a lovely bloke who had really severe type 2 diabetes. So on insulin, max dose, both slow and fast acting, on max dose metformin and on GLP analog to the point where he actually had nausea. He still had fasting morning glucose levels of 10, 12, and his post-meal glucose levels would be 17, 18 millimoles per liter. And we use millimoles per liter. You actually don't want to go much higher than 8 before you're getting into the range of pathology, tissue pathology. And we dropped all his glucose levels to normal within 2 weeks, but he had non-starchy vegetables, lean protein sources, 3 meals a day. And if he wanted to snack, he would snack on cucumbers, tomatoes, steamed broccoli, a piece of chicken breast, that sort of thing. And now we followed him for 12 weeks in the program. By the end of the program, we had him off most of the medications, also his lipids and his blood pressure was normal. And now he's completely off all medications. His hemoglobin A1C, and again, we use other units in Europe than in the US. So in Europe, we use millimoles per mole. So now his hemoglobin A1C is 36 millimoles per mole, and you want to be in the 30s. That's not just outside the pathological range, but that's the ideal range. So I think, translating into, because you use percentage points in US, right? Yeah. So we dropped him down under 5. So now 4 years later, he's off all medications, blood pressure is normal, lipids are normal, all tests of his cardiovascular system normal, but he's still carbohydrate intolerant. So if he starts eating potatoes, rice, that sort of thing, his blood sugars start creeping back up. So he still has type 2 diabetes, but he's completely managed. He's also lost about 30 kilograms, so that's a good 65 pounds or so in the process, and he's in much better shape. He still, because he also has some arthritis, he was already in his late 50s when we started, so he can't run, but he now walks. He did the Copenhagen half marathon walking, and he walked at a pace fast enough that he was only 7 minutes short of the max time for people running. So he was almost, so it's like power walking. Really yeah, exactly. So he's in that sort of shape, and that's his lifestyle. And then we did some basic nutritional interventions. So we gave him vitamin D and got him into the ideal range, and also gave him magnesium and zinc and a good multivitamin and some fish oil because he had inflammation, but just doing that and then make sure his sleep is covered. So he's still type 2 diabetic, but today his disease is not active, so to speak, and he's off medications. So literally drop your carbs to the point necessary, and it's a bit different how aggressively you have to go. Start by getting rid of all the refined ones, and get rid of all the refined unhealthy fats, and base your diet off non-starchy vegetables, lean protein sources, healthy fats, and get moving and get lots of daily movement, and then add training on top of that. And then, we have all these things. We have, supplements, alpha lipoic acid and green coffee bean extract and so forth. You can throw those in the mix, but don't expect them to do the main job. So they can amplify the effects of basic lifestyle interventions. But if you keep on eating too much of the wrong thing, you don't address obesity or visceral fat or hepatic or intrapancreatic fat. In the best case scenario, you might just lower your excess blood glucose a little bit, but you won't, get anywhere. So all these supplements, as I use them also sometimes to get people into the normal range faster, but they have to be considered supplements on top of a basic healthy diet and lifestyle. And then, of course, also if people are highly stressed, you might need to address that. Both, stress can just rob you of the resources to actually be able to make those changes. But I've also seen people who are stressed because what happens during the stress response, acutely blood glucose levels go up to make sure that you have enough circulating energy. So sometimes stress sort of stands in the way, it's a roadblock for people to get over or manage type 2 diabetes. Either they aren't able to find the time, to change their diet and lifestyle, or even though they do that, then there's still a blockage. And the same thing, if they're really sleep deprived, that could be an issue. And obviously, you have really aggressive inflammation for whatever reason. You want to bring that down as well, because that can also interfere with blood sugar, control and levels. And obviously, also if you're hypothyroid, that can make things worse. And then fasting, people who are ready to do that, I also have them do various types of fasting because it's an easy way of reducing total calorie intake. And once you start getting into slightly longer fasting periods, there's probably an effect on top of just the calorie restriction or matching calories in and out. There are probably further effects on all sorts of aspects of health, not just glucose metabolism, but inflammation and so forth. And sometimes if people they want really rapid results, if they're ready to do so, I might have them do a super low calorie but nutrient dense diet for 8 weeks or so. There's some studies from out of Liverpool University in the UK where they looked at the effect of intrahepatic and intrapancreatic fat on type 2 diabetes. And then they had people on a 600 calories a day diet, which is really low, for 8 to 12 weeks. And that completely ripped all fat out. Their liver and their pancreas were just spot clean. And they could literally see the moment the scans were normal. It's like, okay, there's no fat accumulation, blood sugar regulation became normal again, even though people might still have had too much subcutaneous fat. So if people are ready to do that, I might have them do a diet where they will use protein powder because we need protein, but with total control of calories, some non-starchy vegetables, and then something like greens on top of that, not just green vegetables, but like spirulina, broccoli powder, that sort of thing. Lots of fiber. And then, of course, I'll put them on a potent broad spectrum multivitamin mineral and give them low doses of healthy fats. And that you can keep them in that 600 calories a day range. And that can remove their intrahepatic and intrapancreatic fat really quickly. But people need to be ready and dedicated to do that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, the idea of you took a guy who is on max dose of the typical type 2 diabetic drugs, and in 2 weeks, you got his blood sugar into a normal range. Yeah. Anybody can do that, right? This exactly, yeah. Everybody can do, correct?
Yeah, because I mean, it might be hard to change your habits, but living off lots of really high fiber vegetables and then lean protein sources, it's not that advanced or complex.
No,
it's not that expensive either, right? And then drink water or drink sparkling water with no sugar added, and have maybe a cup or two of black coffee or green tea. It's not super advanced. For some people, granted, it can be like a total change of how they eat. So it might take some time. You're going to have mental struggles with yourself, and depending on the food environment you're in, that although that's really simple, it might actually require an effort to acquire that food, but it's not that advanced. It's not that super complex when you get to the point. But that's the sort of diet you would be eating if you were out. If you're with the Aborigines, you'd have that. You'd have some carbs because you'd be eating some tubers as well, so like some sweet potato-like things. But it's pretty simple. So if people do that, you get results, and then you can see the immediate results in your fasting glucose and post-meal glucose levels. And the other thing I see improving really quickly when people do that is if they have high blood pressure, it comes down. And the triglycerides, their LDL and VLDL and HDL, that can take a bit longer before that settles in where we want it. But the triglycerides, I've also seen people drop triglycerides by 50% within 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think you definitely as I appreciate it because it's good for our listeners to hear it from someone other than me,
Yeah.
my wife. And so this is from someone, ladies and gentlemen, that is in another part of the world, but this is a worldwide problem that can't be corrected. Umahro, I know you're going to come back with us again to talk about a very important subject matter that is affecting our world right now, which is COVID-19. But in the meantime, I want people to connect with you. How do they do that, and how would they connect with you?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can follow me on social media. So on Instagram, it's just my name, Umahro, Umahro, and on Facebook, there's my personal Facebook profile, which you look for Umahro, and then there's like my company profile, which is Umahro Food Can Change Your Life. And it's a mixture of Danish and also English. So English is my second first language.
Yes.
And then, I mean, there's my website as well, but at the moment it's really only in Danish. So umahro.dk, or if you do umahro.com, it leads on to the Danish website. So follow me on social media, and then either next year, so 2021 or 2022, we'll actually start publishing some of my books in English, because I've written quite a few bestsellers about health that are bestsellers in Denmark and Scandinavia. And also I'm about to do the launch of version 2 of, I've created Umahro Universe, which is like a online health universe with all this info in here, put into digital format, cooking and information. So once we have everything running smoothly in Danish, then we will go international in English. So
we can't wait. I follow you on social media, as you know, and there's a little button that you can get translation. So make sure you follow Instagram, Facebook, and look for Umahro Universe in English soon, and also get his books. I'm excited about that. I can't read Danish, but I can read English very well, so I'll be the first in line to that. Man, thank you, and I can't wait till we talk real soon on the next one, right?
Thank you, and thank you for, I mean, I'm grateful to you for that there are lots of people like us who are dedicated to helping people achieve all the health and vitality and energy they deserve, and enable people to become their own health experts, so people like can grab hold of the reins themselves and start doing things so they get their body as friend instead of foe. So thank you as well.
Well, you're welcome. So folks, this has been an amazing podcast with Umahro Cadogan, and we're grateful. So thank you for joining us another episode of Healthcare's Missing Link. One thing I always ask you to do is please hit the subscribe button so you can find out what and who is coming up next. Don't let the hidden things in life that are not so hidden anymore bog you down. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on Healthcare's Missing Link.